Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Moving to the brink, still again, how long will it be before the U.S. attacks Iran? Can Rand Paul save the day? And will Google and Facebook determine the next presidential election? Cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest here in Moscow, Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst and editor at InnosMe Internet Media Project. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let's go to London first. Marcus, as I said in my introduction, going to the brink, still again. This is turning into a pattern, which I fully expected for this to happen. We have to remind our viewers here that because of this maximum pressure, Iran already feels like it's on a war footing with the United States because of its policies. And now we have this tit-for-tat process going on in the Gulf. And it was, like I said, it was fully expected, though the problem is that someone will miscalculate. Where do we stand right now, Marcus? Go ahead.
Well, Peter, if Bill Clinton's foreign policy was defined by the former Yugoslavia, with George W. Bush's being Iraq and Barack Obama's being Libya and Syria, then so far, Donald Trump's is Iran, because Mr. Trump has made confronting Iran a personal ambition of his, so much so that he risks provoking a war with Iran, which would be a catastrophic disaster for the Middle East. Mr. Trump is looking at all ways possible to bring down the Iranian government. Firstly, he's doing that through severe economic sanctions, but also he is increasing the flow of weapons, American weapons, to Saudi Arabia. He has pledged to share American nuclear technology with Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And of course, recently, he has deployed about 500 American soldiers to Saudi Arabia. Now, none of that is hardly conducive to fostering peace and stability in the Middle East. But let me say this as well, Peter, and this is something that has been overlooked by many commentators on the Middle East. Under Mr. Trump, American support for the MEK terrorist organization has been waging a savage war against Iranians for nearly 40 years, has increased, so much so that today in Albania, which is a client state of America, MEK terrorists are being trained by the Americans and then are being dispatched to Iran. So this is an extremely dangerous situation. And I will add this as well, Peter, that the Trump administration's lackey, the British government, is also aiding Trump in his concerted campaign against Iran. I believe what happened off the coast of Gibraltar was in part a British provocation in the hope that Iran would respond, which they did, and then that gives the Americans and the British a pretext to take further decisive action against Iran.
And that's why I'm calling it brinkmanship here. Tima, but on the other hand, Rand Paul has Donald Trump's ear. What does that mean to you? Is Trump hedging his bets right here? Because we know that he has a pretty good relationship with Rand Paul. He's, quote unquote, called an isolationist, which he is not. But in lieu of everything that Marcus just said, there seems to be one little ray of hope. Is that just for publicity? Is that just a pluff, a move on Trump's part to show that he's considering other options?
Rand Paul has been the voice of reason for many years now. Basically, one of very few people in Washington who provided a sober analysis of what was going on. But will he be able to resist the onslaught of the fake narrative? I mean, just look, today we have it from the Daily Mirror. The Daily Mirror in the UK, it's an ultimate example how basically a fake story is manufactured. Let me quote you. A British oil tanker was probably steered towards Iranian waters by false GPS coordinates sent by Russian spy technology. It is now feared. So it's like maybe.
So much conjecture in that sentence, right?
And it's just Russian technology, because they're not asserting that it was basically Russians helping Iranians to basically seize that tanker. Then we read further and we get the quote. a Western security source, whoever, this source said, Russia has the technology to spoof GPS and may have helped Iran in this venture as it was extremely brazen. It would make British shipping extremely vulnerable. Okay, so we have this security official, and in the next paragraph already it says, news of Russia's apparent involvement, right? So this is how it starts. Maybe Russian technology, then we have a source, and then we are 100% sure there was Russian involvement. And this is the same story with MH17, you know, the Daily Express recently, they wrote, suddenly, you know, 5 years later, that this whole thing was done by Russia in order to deflect attention from something. I don't even remember what, you know, something was going on besides Ukraine. And you have these allegations, and they're repeated by hundreds of mainstream media outlets. How can Rand Paul...
Actually, the perfect equivalent is that when you have the Mueller report talking about extensive, pervasive, I'm paraphrasing here, Russian meddling in the election,
Absolutely.
which has never been proven here. Marcus, let me go back to you in London. Dima brings up a really good point here, and this is really what irritates me. I expect the Pompeos and the Boltons to want to drive towards war. They have this, that's their record, that's part of their DNA. But the media, again, has never learned its lessons from 2003. We can go much further back, the breakup of Yugoslavia, your specialty, one of them. But the media just continues to parrot the most ridiculous stories. And when evidence is shown to be the contrary, they just move on, nothing to see here. It continues to happen. And I am a regular Fox News watcher. I think a lot of people already know that. But watching like Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham beat the drums of war, it's so pathetic. It's so pathetic. It shows that they are very much part of the swamp as well. Not an alternative. We do know extensive polling that Trump's base does not want any more wars. So it really is the establishment on the political left and on the political right that are continuing to drive these interventions that are extremely unpopular in the heartland. Go ahead, in London.
Well, contrary to what American and British politicians claim, neither America nor Britain has a free nor independent media. They are all very much part of the British and American establishments, respectively. But, you know, Peter, whilst I applaud Donald Trump for his savage attacks against liberal media outlets in America, those liberal media outlets like CNN, for example, are really no different fundamentally to conservative media outlets such as Fox News.
In many ways, I agree, yes.
Or the Wall Street Journal. What we have to remember is that when it comes to foreign policy, American mainstream media, British mainstream media, albeit liberal or conservative, will support the foreign policy objectives of Washington and London. And when it comes to Iran, Iran is a big prize, potentially, for America and Britain, because should the Iranian government fall, then Syria would be in a very precarious situation. Hezbollah would be in a very precarious situation. The Americans and the British would control the Persian Gulf. They would control the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, that would put them in a very geostrategic position.
So Marcus, are they willing? So I guess I'm asking you for a prediction. Is this administration willing to go to war with Iran for what? For the prizes you just mentioned?
Well, I think you succinctly said it at the beginning of this program, Peter. By accident, potentially there could be a war, but I do not believe that America will intentionally go to war against Iran, because Iran is not Iraq. Iran has an extremely powerful military. And also, let's not forget, Peter, what happened during the Iran-Iraq war. Saddam Hussein's forces were not just fighting against the Iranian military, they were fighting against millions of Iranian volunteers. So I do not believe the American military would get into a war with Iran. However, sanctions, support for Saudi Arabia, and also as well support for the MEK terrorist organization, I believe is the most viable options for Trump and the rest of his administration.
I agree, but Dima, I mean, I guess I'm going to have to keep stressing this point here. A state of war does exist right now, okay? Not necessarily, or of course not a shooting war right now, but this maximum pressure denying a sovereign country the ability to export and to earn foreign currency. This is a state of war here, and this is, we're going to see Iran react asymmetrically moving forward, and this is a zigging and zagging that we've been talking about for months right now. But Iran is not going to take everything sitting down. Asymmetrically, it's going to start irritating the United States. That's why people like Pompeo and Bolton are going to say to Trump, the time is now. And Trump knows his political instinct, whatever you think of him, he knows that that would not necessarily and most certainly hurt his campaign for re-election.
You rightly said that, this attitude, let's move on, one lie is uncovered, we move on to another lie. That let's move onism, they're talking about whataboutism concerning the Russian media. In the American media, it's let's move onism. And one of the experts recently said on RT a very interesting thought. He said that we manufacture reality. And before they manage I
think Wolfowitz actually said
to decipher this reality. I think that person name is Ray Radin or something. Before they manage to decipher the reality that we have created 2 hours ago, we create another reality. And this gives us the right to basically be in the state of permanent war. If you look at the situation from the information point of view, the war against Russia, the war against Iran, has never stopped in the last at least 10 years, I would say, not even 5, not since 2014, but even earlier. So basically, Iran has to counteract at some point. It cannot counteract information-wise because the enemy is so predominant. But I think it's better to fight an information war than to fight a real war. And this is very important.
That's why right now. That's why you have to watch this program here. That's all the time we have here. Marcus Papadopoulos, thank you for joining us. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. And now we're joined by Alexander Mercouris in London. He is a writer on legal affairs as well as editor-in-chief of theduran.com. All right, welcome to the program, Alex. We've, over the last 2 years or so, we've talked about meddling in elections, okay? But the real meddling was probably Silicon Valley, okay? And their ability to change perceptions about politics here. Let me read you a few headlines that caught my eye over the last few days. From the Washington Examiner, Ted Cruz, Google has a staggering amount of power to shape culture. Breitbart, Google vice president denies blacklists of search results after leaks showing their existence. And from the Daily Caller, exclusive documents detailing Google's news blacklist show manual manipulation of special search results here. I could go on and on. Of course, the Democrats and liberals don't seem to care because, well, Silicon Valley, that's their cup of tea here. On a more serious note here, this is a real potential for change, influencing and meddling in elections that are just around the corner. And I think we should all be very, very concerned because with the ability of these tech companies to influence what you hear, what you say, what you read is overwhelming. Go ahead, Alex in London.
I think that is exactly right, and overwhelming is the correct word, because most people now have access to the internet, at least in advanced countries like the United States. And most countries, their perceptions of things are formed through the internet. And the whole point in a democracy is that you should be getting a diversity of views and you should be getting information from various sources. But if you have a situation where a small number of monopolists, and let's be quite clear about this, organizations like Facebook and Google are in effect monopolists, control what you are able to see on the internet, and have a strong political bias when they're exercising that control and are using that control in order to exclude or downplay views which are different from their own.
But Alex, but they're saying that they're playing the role of a public good. They're not a publisher. They're just a platform. They don't discriminate. I watched the hearings, the congressional hearings. Yeah. I mean, they really do believe that they're doing something in the public interest here. But we've seen, and I think all of us here on this program and a lot of our viewers know of people who have been shadow banned, banned on Facebook, on YouTube here. They're just ideologically driven, that they cannot conceive that people can think differently than they do. This is a very authoritarian mindset, though they wouldn't believe it themselves. Go ahead, Alex.
Well, this is exactly the point, Peter, because the word you use is believe. Nobody should entrust such power to someone's beliefs. It's always a system that ought to be either open and regulated by law, because beliefs, one person's beliefs, are someone else's, extremely dangerous opinions. And for someone in Google to say, well, I'm here to act as some sort of gatekeeper, and I'm therefore empowered to decide what you should read and what you shouldn't read, that is to put a position of power in someone's hands which no one should be able to exercise. And I'm glad you brought up the congressional hearings, because, of course, the person who's driving this is Ted Cruz, who is a very brilliant lawyer with massive legal experience. And that is exactly the point he's making and driving home. He's saying, obviously, all of these people that you mentioned are being, shadow banned. Google manipulates information, Facebook manipulates information, and this is an untrammeled power which should not be exercised, and which is being exercised in a discriminatory and biased way. And he's right.
Yes, and Dima, but by their behavior, by the very definition of the behavior, they are publishers now. Mm-hmm. They are not platforms. And they claim not to put their thumbs on the scale, but they do it all of the time. I know people that have been discriminated against on many of these platforms here because of their political views, and their political views are hardly extreme. I mean, some of them are just commonsensical and challenging the monopolitical culture of Silicon Valley.
Well, I just love the quote from the Washington Examiner, in their article about Facebook and about Google. They quote an expert, Francesca Tripodi, a professor and researcher at James Madison University, who says that there is no such thing as a neutral Google search. There is simply no such thing, right? And what are they fighting against? The Daily Caller is quoting a policy document of Google, which says that the company is prohibiting, it's fighting against fake news, hate speech, conspiracy theories, or science denial, unless we're sure that that's what the user wants, end of quote. Well, that reminds me of this nanny state concept, They, in the Google, they know what the user wants. So they tell him, you don't want any fake news, you don't want any science denial, but let me just cite you several stories that would be cited, that would be qualified as this. If I said in 2002 that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction and didn't plan to get them, that would be fake news, right? I would be bought. If I said that Donald Rumsfeld was actually planning a military invasion which would be criminal and which would, kill hundreds of thousands of people, that would be hate speech against Donald Rumsfeld. If I said that basically a lot of invasions, a lot of wars prepared by the United States are actually not necessarily, that would be a conspiracy theory, right? So it just shows you how you can prevent any dissenting view from being expressed simply by classifying it as something wrong for the user.
Let me go back to London here. Alex, I mean, looking at this internal document that Dima Babic was just quoting there, I mean, if we're talking about fake news, why isn't Google and Facebook monitoring CNN and MSNBC? I mean, at least those two American outlets, because it seems to me that they're the source of a lot of the fake news that we hear about all of the time. As a matter of fact, the whole purpose of this format is to question the monopolitical culture that the mass media is always peddling to the audience. If they weren't peddling fake news, we wouldn't have a reason to be doing these programs. Go ahead, Alex, in London.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the reason they're not acting like that against, organizations like CNN and MSNBC and all the rest is because they share their ideological biases. And of course, Dima is absolutely right to bring up all the war with Iraq and the allegations about weapons of mass destruction there, which turned out to be completely wrong. But of course, we've had an even bigger example in a way, which is the Russiagate collusion allegations, in which Donald Trump was regularly being spoken of in the media as being involved in some sort of strange conspiracy with Russian intelligence to steal the election. And that was the orthodoxy, and that was the imposed orthodoxy. If you peddled it, you were not somebody engaging in fake news or a conspiracy theory.
And if you countered it, you were a conspiracy theorist, by definition.
By definition, exactly. And as a conspiracy theorist, if you countered it, even though you were right, you would be shadow banned or risk being so.
And the interesting thing is you have someone like Aaron Mate, which is very much a progressive, a man on the left, would be saying more or less the same thing that all of us would be saying on this panel about Russiagate. So it's not a left-right thing. It's about being honest and looking at forensic evidence and drawing reasonable conclusions without taking a side in this political debate. What I've always wanted to know, I'm not a big supporter of Donald Trump, but I see that the media has conspired against him. I see the deep state has conspired against him, and it's a toxic mixture that actually poisons our politics.
Well, that's right, Peter. I mean, if we come back to it, it's not fact-based, it's narrative-based. It's this attempt to impose certain narratives and elevate them to orthodoxies and to suppress anybody who disagrees with them. So Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Donald Trump has conspired with the Russians. And that's what it's all about. But, there are signs of hope in these congressional discussions that we saw. Ted Cruz, who I come back, is a brilliant lawyer with very extensive experience of arguing cases at the Supreme Court, was making exactly the point that you're making, that these organizations are behaving increasingly like publishers, not like platforms, and that in light of this, they should be legally liable for what are quite obviously now editorial decisions. And I think this is a demand which is going to grow.
Okay, Dima, what Alexander Mercouris said about narratives, I'm going to write that down on a piece of paper, I'm going to fold it up, I'm going to put it in my jacket, and I'm going to use that one day. And I'm going to steal it from Alexander Mercouris because he'll know that he said it here first. There's hope. 1 minute left. This is what we hear from Alex. There's hope. Antitrust?
Well, antitrust, and maybe also people will start to realize that the controversy here is not between liberal narrative and conservative narrative, as we're told by the experts in the Washington Examiner. The confrontation here is between basically totalitarian, ultra-liberal, center, and left and right. People who may like conservative values, left-leaning progressives like Aaron Mate, whom you just cited. We need to unite against this totalitarian center, just like Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, three very different people, united against Nazi Germany in the 1940s.
Well, we'll see here. Alexander Mercouris, real quick here. Do you think we'll talk about antitrust? 15 seconds.
Oh, I mean, antitrust, because we're dealing with monopolies which are clearly abusing their power. I also think we could very well be seeing challenges under the First Amendment. And Ted Cruz was also talking about lifting their immunity that these tech companies have against legal action brought against them for comments that people make. So we could see all kinds of things.
That's all the time we have here. We're going to call you on this topic again here. That's all the time we have. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.